United States Air Force C-130s provided most of the necessary transportation. On the eve of the signing of the Paris Agreement, nearly 11,000 former Viet Cong soldiers elected not to return to North Vietnam or the Viet Cong. These new life PW were released into South Vietnamese society. Careful accountability was maintained for the PW awaiting release. A complete personnel record, including medical data, accompanied each PW. Many of the PW had been emaciated when captured. However, a nutrition survey team from the United States Army Medical Research and Nutrition Laboratories found that PW gained from 8 to 15 pounds per man while in South Vietnamese PW camps. As the release operation began, not everything went according to schedule. At Bien Hoa, where movement to the airport was scheduled to begin at 6 a.m., PW refused to move until it received instructions from the Viet Cong. The Subcommittee on Captured Persons of the Joint Military Commission was dispatched from Saigon to confer with the reluctant PW. This delay held up the release of 27 American prisoners of war at Loc Ninh. After a lengthy meeting, the PW agreed to start the repatriation. In accordance with the Paris protocols, the sick and the wounded were moved first. As is customary in Vietnam, the PW used towels to shade their heads from the sun. Accountability was strictly maintained both in the camps and at the release sites. Special provision was made for the transportation of litter cases. Other difficulties were encountered during the release of the women. Throughout the conflict, women soldiers were captured alongside other enemy soldiers. The female PW were interned at Quy Nhon. Following the North Vietnamese invasion during Easter 1972, the women were evacuated and cared for at Can Tho. As a group, they remained difficult and contentious, discarding clothing, daily rations of rice, and other personal items, and staging fainting spells at release sites. The priorities of release were carefully followed. First, the sick and wounded, then the aged and the women, finally, the able-bodied PW. Loading of aircraft was assisted by U.S. Air Force personnel and Army advisors. By terms of the Paris agreements, the International Commission of Control and Supervision was created, composed of representatives from Canada, Hungary, Indonesia, and Poland. The ICCS observed every phase of the release of PW. Air transport was chosen both because of the speed of movement and the lack of suitable ground or water transportation.
Mời đại úy Chí lại gặp tôi gấp. Xin nhắc lại mời đại úy Chí đến gặp tôi gấp.
Many PW were flown to Quang Tri City, just north of Hue and close to Tak Han River. They were then moved by truck through Quang Tri City, a bitter reminder of the war. Upon arriving at the exchange site, some of the PW made a final gesture of defiance, discarding their PW camp-issued uniforms. The North Vietnamese made a show of providing assistance, sometimes including medical personnel, whether PW needed it or not. American and South Vietnamese representatives to the JMC were on hand throughout release operations. Exchange site rosters contained the names of each PW, his interment serial number, date of capture, date of birth, and parents' names. As each man was checked off, he was moved to a new tent to receive a fresh uniform. ICCS members observed all formalities at the repatriation sites. As each new group of PW reached an exchange site, the same rituals of defiance were repeated. This was at Loc Ninh.